possibly hear those thin sounds over the drumming water? She turned off the tap. For a moment, the world seemed to be filled with absolutely perfect, tomb-like silence. Then she heard the soughing wind once more. It carried with it the distorted music of a calliope that was piping energetically out on the midway. And from within the bassinet, scratching, scrabbling. Suddenly the child cried out. It was a harsh, grating screech, a single fierce bleat of frustration and anger, then quiet. For a few seconds the baby was still, utterly motionless, but then it began its relentless movement again. With shaking hands, Ellen put fresh ice in her glass and poured more bourbon. She hadn't intended to drink any more, but the child's scream had been like an intense blast of heat that had burned away the alcohol haze through which she had been moving. She was sober again, and fear followed swiftly in the wake of sobriety. Although the night was hot and humid, she shivered. She was no longer capable of murdering the child. She was no longer even brave enough to approach the bassinet. But I've got to do it, she thought. She returned to the booth that encircled the kitchen table, sat down and sipped her whiskey, trying to regain the courage that came with intoxication, the only sort of courage she seemed able to summon. I'm too young to carry this burden, she thought. I don't have the strength to handle it, I admit that. God help me, I just don't have the strength. At 20, Ellen Straker was not only much too young to be trapped in the bleak future that now seemed to lie ahead of her, she was also too pretty and vibrant to be condemned to a life of unremitting heartache and crushing responsibility. She was a slender, shapely girl woman, a butterfly that had never really had a chance to try out its wings. Her hair was dark brown, almost black, so were her large eyes, and there was a natural rosy tint to her cheeks that perfectly complemented her olive-toned skin. Before marrying Conrad Straker, she had been Ellen Teresa Marie Giovanetto, the daughter of a handsome Italian-American father and a Madonna-faced Italian-American mother. Ellen's Mediterranean beauty was not the only quality about her that revealed her heritage. She had a talent for finding joy in small things, an expansive personality, a quick smile, and a warmth that were all quite Italian in nature. She was a woman meant for good times, for parties and dances and gaiety. But in her first 20 years of life, there had not been very much laughter. Her childhood was grim. Her adolescence was an ordeal. Although Joseph Giovanetto, her father, had been a warm, good-hearted man, he had also been meek. He had not been the master of his own home, and he hadn't had a great deal to say about how his daughter ought to be raised. Ellen had not been soothed by her father's gentle humor and quiet love nearly so often as she had been subjected to her mother's fiery religious zealotry. Gina was the power in the Giovanetto house, and it was to her that Ellen had to answer for the slightest impropriety, real or imagined. There were rules, an endless list of them, which were meant to govern Ellen's behavior, and Gina was determined that every rule would be rigidly enforced and strictly obeyed. She intended to see that her daughter grew up to be a very moral, prim, God-fearing woman. Gina always had been religious, but after the death of her only son, she became fanatically devout. Anthony, Ellen's brother, died of cancer when he was only 7 years old. Ellen was just 4 at the time, too young to understand what was happening to her brother, but old enough to be aware of his frighteningly swift deterioration. To Gina, that tragedy had been a divine judgment leveled against her. She felt that she had somehow failed to please God, and that he had taken her little boy to punish her. She began going to Mass every morning instead of just on Sundays, and she dragged her little girl with her. She lit a candle for Anthony's soul every day of the week without fail. At home, she read the Bible from cover to cover over and over again. Often she forced Ellen to sit and listen to scripture for hours at a time, even before the girl was old enough to understand what she was hearing. Gina was full of horrible stories about hell, what it was like, what grisly tortures awaited a sinner down there.